The Suebi were a major group of Germanic peoples originating from the Elbe River region of present-day Germany and the Czech Republic. They first appear in the historical record through Julius Caesar, who described them in detail during his campaigns in Gaul. In his accounts, Caesar identified the Suebi as a distinct people separate from the Marcomanni, and characterized them as the largest and most warlike faction among the Germanic tribes. The Suebi were noted for their aggressive incursions into Gaul, where they imposed their presence on Gallic tribes, causing significant upheaval during the late 1st century BC. Caesar noted that the Suebians practiced a form of mobile pastoralism, primarily relying on animal husbandry and hunting rather than agriculture. He observed their lifestyle was one of constant movement, with them living in temporary structures rather than permanent settlements. Their dietary habits revolved around milk and meat, with a prohibition on wine which they obtained primarily through trade. The Suebi reportedly lacked a system of private land ownership and would not reside in one place for more than a year. Caesar also described their social system, which was divided into 100 cantons, each responsible for providing 1,000 armed men for military pursuits. Strabo, a geographer of the late 1st century BC and early 1st century AD, corroborated Caesar's observations, emphasizing the Suebi's power and organization. He marked their territory as predominantly located between the Rhine and the Elbe rivers, establishing them firmly in the geographic landscape of Germania. Strabo's writings highlighted the existence of multiple tribes within the broader Suebian category, including the Marcomanni, Quadi, and Hermunduri. These tribes exhibited a high degree of mobility, which set them apart from the more settled Germanic groups, such as the Chatti. The Semnones, often regarded as one of the oldest and most noble of the Suebi, were noted for their communal ethos. Tacitus, writing in the late 1st century AD, described them as having significant influence and authority among his peers. He referred to them as possessing a large community, having 100 cantons, and identifying themselves as the head of the Suebian group. The Semnones held a revered place due to their perceived antiquity and nobility. During the reign of Augustus, the Roman Empire undertook campaigns against various Germanic tribes. This included a series of engagements that pushed into the territories of the Suebian peoples. After a significant defeat in 9 BC, King Maroboduus established a Suebian kingdom amidst the mountains and forests of Bohemia. This kingdom acted as a buffer against Roman expansion and highlighted the emergence of centralized leadership among the Suebi. Roman historian Cassius Dio documented events around the turn of the millennium that illustrated the dynamic relationships between the Romans and the Suebi. He noted that in 29 BC the Suebi crossed the Rhine but faced a decisive defeat at the hands of Roman forces led by Gaius Carrinas. This military engagement underscored the increasing interactions between these two powerful groups, with the Romans often viewing the Suebi as a formidable presence. In the post-Caesar period, other Roman leaders continued to engage with the Suebi. Under Augustus' command, efforts were made to contain the Suebi and their allies in the aftermath of the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, where several Roman legions were annihilated in 9 AD. This battle was not primarily associated with the Suebi, though elements of Suebic tribes were involved, showing the interconnectedness of various tribes against Roman advancement. The late 1st century AD saw notable figures like the Suebian kings Italicus and Sido providing support to the Flavian Emperor Vespasian during his rise to power. These alliances indicated that certain Suebian leaders recognized the potential benefits of aligning with Rome during tumultuous periods. The Marcomanni, a prominent Suebian tribe, rose to significance during the reign of Marcus Aurelius in the late 2nd century AD. Facing pressures from East Germanic tribes, they made incursions into Roman territory, adding tension to the Roman frontiers and leading to military responses from the empire. Ptolemy, a geographer of the 2nd century AD, detailed the locations of various Suebian tribes along the northern bank of the Danube. He noted the existence of tribes such as the Paramaikampi, Adrabaikampi, and Baimoi, which were indicative of the Suebian distribution. Such accounts confirmed the widespread presence of the Suebi across large areas of Germania. Throughout their history, the Suebi maintained identifiable cultural traits such as the Suebian knot hairstyle, which served as a marker of social status. Their warriors were known for their distinctive appearance, incorporating practical elements of mobility into their military systems. The Chatti were an ancient Germanic tribe whose territory lay in central and northeastern Hesse and southern Lower Saxony, near the upper reaches of the Weser, Visurgis river. They lived in a region characterized by hills and forests, particularly the Hercynian one, which defined their landscape and influenced their way of life. They settled in this area around the 1st century BC. The Chatti are believed to have been part of the broader Germanic movements that resulted in the displacement of earlier inhabitants, including Celts. Notably, Julius Caesar, who wrote in detail about various tribes near the Rhine, did not mention the Chatti by name. Instead, he focused on the Suebi who had recently expanded into the region, suggesting that the Chatti may have been overshadowed by larger tribes during Caesar's time. However, Strabo acknowledged the Chatti as one of the smaller tribes separate from the Suebi around 24 AD, highlighting their distinct identity within the Germanic landscape. In 6 AD, the historian Velleius Paterculus first recorded the Chatti in his writings, noting a military movement through their territory towards Boiohaimum. This reference marks an early indication of their interactions with the Roman state. Later, in approximately 16 AD, Strabo described the Chatti as among the more settled tribes in Germany, contrasting them with nomadic tribes. He noted that their resources were diminished due to past encounters with the Romans. Tacitus, writing in the early 2nd century, provides the most substantial information regarding the Chatti. He depicted them as a robust people with distinctive physical features, hardy builds, fierce faces, and notable courage. They had a well-organized system of leadership, promoting capable individuals to power and following their chosen leaders with loyalty and discipline. Unlike many neighboring tribes that often engage in raids, the Chatti typically prepared for campaigns, reflecting a more strategic approach to their military activities. Tacitus famously noted that the Chatti excelled in infantry combat, traveling with iron, tools, and supplies, emphasizing their preparation and resilience. They actively cultivated a reputation for personal valor linked to their traditions around haircuts and beards. Upon reaching manhood, Chatti would let their hair grow until they had defeated an enemy, marking their transition to warriors. This practice reinforced their identity and the communal expectation of bravery. In the international landscape of Germania, the Chatti were situated near other groups, including the Tencteris and the Usipetes to the west and the Chauci to the north, and the Cherusci to the east. Their proximity to these tribes influenced their interactions and alliances. The Chatti were involved in significant events such as the coalition led by Arminius that resulted in the defeat of Roman legions at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. This victory marked a high point for the Chatti and their allies in resisting Roman expansion. Following this, Germanicus mounted retaliatory expeditions into Chatti territory around 15 AD, highlighting the ongoing tensions between the Roman Empire and the Chatti tribe. Despite the Romans' military superiority, the Chatti managed to maintain their independence and resisted incorporation into the Roman Empire, largely through their formidable defenses and military organization. In the following decades, the Romans built limes fortifications along the boundaries of Chatti lands as a means of containing their influence and preventing incursions into the empire's territory. The Chatti engaged in skirmishes against the Romans, including a major raid into Germania Superior that was decisively repelled in 50 AD. Moreover, territorial dispute with the Hermunduri in 58 AD resulted in defeats for the Chatti. Roman sources referred to Mattium as the capital of the Chatti, though its precise location remains uncertain. It is believed to have been destroyed by Germanicus, and its building style and layout signified the tribe's engagement with Roman customs while retaining their distinct identities. The Chatti's territorial integrity continued to be challenged as they engaged in various military actions and maintained alliances, such as participating in revolts against Roman authority. The Chatti were notably involved in events surrounding the revolt led by Lucius Antonius Saturninus in 89 AD, revealing their willingness to assert their independence against Roman rule. The geographic positioning of the Chatti, nestled among other tribes, facilitated both trading opportunities and prerequisites for potential alliances. The rituals and cultural practices of the Chatti played a significant role in their identity. They placed great value on personal honor, and demonstrating bravery often engaged in elaborate ceremonies that reinforced their warrior status. Such traditions and social norms helped maintaining cohesion within their community and established the warrior ethos that characterized their society. Additionally, the names of places associated with the Chatti, such as Hesse, Kassel, and Katwijk, indicate their lasting influence on the region. Historical interpretations suggest that even in the medieval period, the Chatti's legacy was recognized, foreshadowing later identities that emerged within the spectrum of Germanic tribes. The enduring legacy of the Chatti can also be observed in their association with the legendary first king of the Franks, Marcomanni, the leader of the Angrivarii, and the Chatti proposed a unified kingship among the Franks, a significant shift in their traditional system of government. The subsequent recognition of Pharamond as king established a new political order that would resonate through subsequent generations. The Marcomanni were a Germanic tribe settled in the region north of the river Danube, prominently situated within the constellation of Suebian peoples. Their earliest historical record traces back to around 60 BC, when they appeared in the accounts of Julius Caesar, who noted their presence among groups allied with Arivistus, a Germanic chieftain who sought to instigate settlements in Gaul. The exact location of their homeland remains ambiguous, though archaeological findings insinuate they occupied areas near the central Elbe and Saale rivers, or possibly further southwest in Franconia. In the wake of the Roman victory over the Germanic coalition led by Arivistus, the intrinsic dynamics of the region began to evolve. Following a defeat around 9 BC inflicted by the Romans under Drusus the Elder, the Marcomanni faced a significant turmoil. This defeat led to a migration that resulted in their settlement in a forested mountainous region synonymous with modern-day Bohemia. During this period, the Marcomanni appointed Maroboduus as their king, a notable figure who had been raised within the Roman sphere of influence. Positioned at the crest of his power, Maroboduus orchestrated a Rome-aligned Suebian system extending into the territories of neighboring tribes, which included the Hermunduri, Quadi, and others. Maroboduus established a formidable kingdom within the Arsenian forest, creating a complex of alliances that strengthened the Marcomannic rule. He endeavored to promote a unified system among the Suebian tribes and sought to cultivate relations with Rome, resulting in a kingdom perceived as a buffer against potential threats to the empire. His rule saw strategic military drilling of his forces, which reflected Roman methodologies, indicating a desire to leverage this military system for both defensive and offensive purposes against any southern aggressors. Rome's initial response to Maroboduus was largely diplomatic. However, tensions mounted following the pivotal events surrounding the rebellion of Arminius of the Cherusci. Maroboduus did not support Arminius, leading to defections among some of his allies, specifically the Semnones and Langobardi, who sought autonomy from his rule. This defection undermined Maroboduus' standing and was further complicated by subsequent hostilities among Germanic tribes, which drew the attention of Roman authorities. Maroboduus found himself increasingly isolated amid the challenging allegiances in Germania, as Roman leaders became more concerned about the unified power of the Marcomanni. Around 19 AD, Maroboduus was deposed by Catualda, a challenger with connections to the Teutones who had taken refuge with the Romans. Catualda's rule was short-lived, marked by instability that led to his ousting by Vibelius of the Hermunduri, establishing a system where Marcomanni and other Suebian factions became incorporated into a more extensive network under Roman auspices. The subjects of the former kings were relocated near the Danube, effectively creating a buffer zone that further exemplified Roman influence in the region. The Marcomanni experienced relative quietude in the ensuing decades, marked by loyal alliances to Rome. However, this stability waned during the reign of Domitian, when tensions arose over military assistance to the empire. After a series of confrontations, the Marcomanni firmly placed themselves into an aligned system of regional tribes, all maintaining a mixture of independent and dependent status concerning Rome. By around 167 AD, emergent pressures led to an invasion of northern Italy by combined Marcomanni and Quadi forces, resulting in engagements that saw significant Roman attention and military response. Despite initial successes, the subsequent campaign drew upon Roman resources and military might, subjecting the Marcomanni's operational capacity to the scrutiny of the Roman command. During the reign of Marcus Aurelius, the Marcomanni engaged in a notable series of warfare termed the Marcomannic Wars, challenging the integrity of the Roman frontiers. The Romans, increasingly preoccupied with their territorial integrity, fought to maintain control over this strategic region, which included a myriad of Germanic tribes poised to resist Roman expansion. Both sides experienced victories and setbacks, with Marcomanni tactics becoming highly regarded for their ferocity and adaptability. The Romans recognized the necessity to maintain a robust system of fortifications and military installations to manage the situation. The Marcomanni employed a mobile and flexible system of warfare which mirrored some of their adversaries' strategies, allowing them to strike effectively against Roman legions. The Hermunduri were an ancient Germanic tribe primarily located near the source of the Elbe River in a region that today is part of Bohemia. They existed from at least the 1st century AD, with their presence noted in various historical accounts and geographical writings of the time. The tribe is speculated by some scholars to have ties with the Turingi, a group to the north, although this proposition lacks definitive evidence. Strabo, a Hellenic geographer, characterized the Hermunduri as part of the Suebian people, describing them as nomadic and situated east of the Elbe River. He noted the vast expanse of the Suevi, who extended from the Rhine to the Elbe, including tribes such as the Hermunduri and the Langobardi. This association placed the Hermunduri among a larger group, indicating their cultural and possibly linguistic connections to other Suebian tribes. In 1 AD, Roman engagements with the Hermunduri began to be documented. A Roman official named Domitius was recorded as encountering the tribe while governing the region along the Danube. Domitius intervened as the Hermunduri sought a new territory leading to their settlement within Marcomannian dominion, after forming alliances with neighboring groups. This act symbolized a notable interaction between the Romans and the Hermunduri, highlighting a mutual interest in land and protection. Velleius Paterculus, a Roman historian, further elaborated on the significance of the Hermunduri, remarking that the Roman army had reached their lands in a substantial campaign that pushed well beyond the Rhine. The delineation of land held by the Hermunduri was notable, as it was strategically located near key river systems. In Pliny the Elder's Historia Naturalis, the Hermunduri were identified as one of the tribes of the Hermiones, tracing their lineage back to a legendary ancestor named Mannus. This categorization placed them within a broader perspective of Germanic identity, aligning them with other tribes such as the Chatti and Cherusci. Tacitus, in his work Germania, described the Hermunduri as a group known for their loyalty to Rome. He noted that they were unique among Germanic tribes due to their engagement in trade, not only at river banks but also deep inland, with connections to the Roman province of Raetia. Their ability to move freely within Roman territories without the need for armed escort reflected a significant level of trust between the tribes and the Roman authorities. The Hermunduri were permitted access to Roman estates, suggesting amicable relations and mutual respect. The political landscape of the Hermunduri was characterized by influential figures such as Vibelius. In 18 AD, Vibelius led a significant political upheaval by assisting in the overthrow of the Marcomannic king Catualda, thereby supporting the installation of the Quadian king Vannius. The involvement of the Hermunduri in this transition illustrated their role in regional power dynamics. Over the ensuing years, Vibelius remained a pivotal figure allied with Vannius' nephews Bangio and Sido, as they orchestrated the removal of Vannius around 50 AD. This alliance and subsequent actions highlighted the complexities of leadership and allegiance among Germanic tribes, with the Hermunduri playing a central role in determining leadership. In 58 AD, the Hermunduri engaged in hostilities with the Chatti over a territorial dispute regarding a river known for its salt deposits, possibly the Werra or the Saxon Saale. The successful outcome of this engagement solidified their position and influence in the region, reinforcing their territorial claims while also contributing to their reputation among neighboring tribes. Throughout their existence, the Hermunduri maintained a delicate balance between integration and independence from Roman influences. Their commitment to trading with the Romans and their loyalty meant that they operated within a complex network of alliances, often dictating their responses to external pressures. Geographically, the lands occupied by the Hermunduri were significant because they encompassed fertile river valleys crucial for agriculture and trade. The Elbe River, in particular, was renowned among the tribes for its potential in facilitating movement and commerce, further enhancing the Hermunduri's standing. The Cherusci were a Germanic tribe located in the region of northwestern Germania, particularly around the central Weser River, in an area corresponding to present-day Hannover. Their territory was characterized by plains and dense forests, which shaped their way of life and cultural practices. The Cherusci are first mentioned in the writings of Julius Caesar, specifically in his commentaries on the Gallic War, where he provides insights into their geographical position in relation to other tribes like the Suebi. Caesar, while campaigning in Gaul, crossed the Rhine in 53 BC to address the actions of the Suebi, who had provided reinforcements to the Treveri. In this context, he noted that the Suebi were separated from the Cherusci by a region he referred to as the Bacensis Forest, presumed to be a thick beech forest, likely the Harz Mountains. The embedding of the Cherusci within the larger context of Germanic tribes is indicative of their interconnectedness with neighboring groups. According to Pliny the Elder, the Cherusci formed part of a group of tribes known as Semnones, who traced their lineage to a mythological ancestor named Mannus. Tacitus, later in his works, defined the geographical positioning of the Cherusci between the Chauci and the Chatti, suggesting their territory stretched from the Weser to the Elbe rivers. The early historical narrative of the Cherusci includes Roman military engagements, particularly those commanded by Drusus, who led an incursion into their lands around 12 BC. During a campaign, Drusus encountered an ambush at a narrow pass known as Arbalo. Initially victorious, the Cherusci chose not to follow through with their advantage, allowing Drusus' forces to break free. By the winter of that year, Drusus had regained sufficient control to establish a Roman garrison in Cheruscan territory. The Cherusci remained resistant to subsequent Roman advances, participating in what was described as a vast war starting around 2 BC. The military force of Tiberius in the early years of the Common Era eventually led to a different outcome. By 4 AD, Tiberius had subdued factions within the Cherusci who were still opposed to Roman influence, and the tribe was acknowledged as an ally. As part of their alliance, the Cherusci benefited from certain privileges under Roman rule. Zagimer, a prominent chieftain, sent 2 of his sons to Rome, where they received education and military training. The elder son, Arminius, later returned to Germania as an auxiliary commander under Quinctilius Varus, who had been tasked with the administration of Germania Magna. However, Arminius harbored ambitions of uniting various tribes against Roman rule. He began to organize a coordinated attack against Varus' legions. A nobleman named Segestes, who supported Rome, attempted to warn Varus about Arminius' plans, but his warnings went unheeded. This oversight led to the ambush in the Teutoburg forest in 9 AD, where Arminius orchestrated a decisive attack that resulted in the destruction of 3 Roman legions, the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th, alongside the deaths of many seasoned Roman officers. In the aftermath of the ambush, the Roman response included punitive measures against not only the Cherusci but also surrounding tribes. Germanicus led a series of campaigns aimed at retaliating against those who had taken part in the ambush. In AD 14, he launched a significant military operation, advancing into the territory of the Chatti and Marsi, committing acts of destruction in his wake. Germanicus' efforts to reclaim honor and restore Roman prestige led him to the Cheruscan heartland. There, he faced Arminius and his forces in a string of military encounters, most notably at a place referred to as Pontes Longi. In this engagement, the Roman infantry managed to encircle the Cherusci, leading to a temporary Roman advantage, though some historians argue the outcome was inconclusive. In 16 A.D., Germanicus returned with a larger force, including 8 legions, and engaged the Cherusci at the Battle of the Weser River. Following a day-long encounter, the Romans emerged victorious. The Cherusci suffered heavy losses, and both Arminius and his uncle were wounded, but they managed to evade capture. Despite these setbacks, the Cherusci remained resilient. In the years following Arminius' death in 21 A.D., subsequent leadership fell to Italicus, the son of Flavus and nephew of Arminius. He was sent by Rome to lead the tribe after internal strife destabilized the local nobility. Italicus initially garnered support but soon lost favor due to his upbringing in Rome as a Roman citizen, unfamiliar with the traditional values of the Cherusci. The Roman accounts, particularly from Tacitus, characterized the Cherusci as having a profound appreciation for peace, suggesting that their pacifism ultimately made them vulnerable to their neighbors and foreign powers. The Chatti were deemed more martial and pragmatic, subdued the Cherusci around 88 A.D., leading to their gradual absorption into larger groups such as the Saxons, Thuringians, Franks, and Alemanni. The Semnones were a prominent Germanic tribe and a notable subgroup within the larger Suebi people situated between the Elbe and Oder rivers during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Their claim to being among the oldest and most revered branches of the Suebi is detailed in ancient Roman accounts, particularly by Tacitus, who observed their customs and societal organization in his work Germania. According to Tacitus, the Semnones engaged in significant religious practices that reflected their cultural identity. They believed their origins were connected to a sacred grove, a revered site where representatives of various tribes would convene at designated times. This grove was central to their ritualistic practices and was linked to their creation myths, symbolizing both the unity and the might of their people. The gathering was marked by the public slaughter of a human victim, which they associated with the inception of their customs, ritualistic bloodshed emphasizing their beliefs in the supernatural and divine favor. Access to this sacred grove was strictly regulated. Only individuals entering under specific conditions, such as being bound in chains, were deemed worthy of approaching. This practice reflected a profound respect for the divine presence believed to reside within the grove. The act of crawling out upon falling rather than being helped to rise illustrated the humility expected of those who participate in the religious system of the Semnones. It indicated a collective consciousness that prioritized reverence for their deity over individual needs or status. The Semnones had an intricate belief in a supreme deity referred to as Regnator Omnius Deus, meaning the ruler of all. This god was worshipped with earnest devotion in various ceremonies and acts of reverence, defining the relationship between the people and the divine. Their belief system underpinned the laws and customs that governed their daily lives, reinforcing the notion that all members were subordinate to this higher power. Culturally, the Semnones engaged in various traditions and practices that bound them together as a unified entity. Their historical significance was noted by early Roman historians and geographers. The name Semnones likely shares etymological ties to Suebi, reinforcing the interconnections with this larger group of Germanic tribes. Julius Caesar, in his accounts of various tribes, referenced the Suebi's might, noting their organization military prowess, but did not specifically mention the Semnones. Leadership within the Semnones comprised figures such as King Masius and Priestess Ganna, who played vital roles in both governance and religious practices. The authority held by Masius demonstrated the centralization of power within their community, bolstered by the divine legitimacy bestowed upon their kingship by the priestess. Ganna's role as a priestess highlighted the significance of female figures in their spiritual hierarchy, suggesting that women could hold substantial sway in the religious and social systems of the tribe. Geographically, the Semnones were known to occupy a remarkable expanse of territory, leading them to consider themselves as the leading tribe among the Suebi. They claimed jurisdiction over as many as 100 cantons, reinforcing their beliefs in their preeminent position. Such governance would have necessitated a systematic approach to administration and social organization, indicating they maintained a structured community life with rules and duties directed at both the individual and the collective, with other tribes and groups exchanging goods and cultural influences which were a hallmark of life in the region. Over time, their relationships with neighboring tribes evolved as they engaged in trade, alliances, and localized systems of governance. Their geographic positioning between various European populations facilitated these interactions, contributing to their tribal identity. Ptolemy's maps in the 2nd century mention a forest called Semanus Silva, although the exact connection between this forest and the Semnones remains ambiguous. This geographical reference underscores that their presence was significant enough to be noted by contemporary observers. Their connection to their landscapes was integral to their identity, suggesting that the physical environment influenced their cultural practices and reaffirmed their ties to their ancestral roots. By the end of the 2nd century, the Semnones were noted to have begun a gradual transition southward. This movement marked necessary adaptations to changing circumstances, whether they stemmed from resources availability, interactions with neighboring peoples, or internal dynamics. Over time, they would become part of the Alemanni people, indicating a blending of identities and cultures as they merged into a broader collective. The Langobardi, known initially as the Vinili, are believed to have originated in Scania, an area characterized by its fertile lands and strategic coastal position. According to their tradition, they encountered overpopulation, prompting a portion of their community to seek new territories. The transition was led by the matriarch Gambara and her 2 sons, Ibor and Aio. They aimed to create a new home for their people and set out across the Baltic Sea to the shores of Scoringa, territory ruled by the Vandals. This encounter proved pivotal, as the Langobardi were presented with the choice of paying tribute or engaging in battle for their freedom. A significant moment in Langobard history is associated with their clever strategy to use deception during the impending encounter with the Vandals. Gambara, in a bid to rally her people, was advised by the goddess Freya. This guidance led the women of the Vinili to tie their long hair in such a way that it resembled beards, creating the visual impression of formidable warriors. This disguise helped to gain Wodan's favor and ultimately contributed to their victory. Following this triumph, they adopted the name Langobardi, which signifies long beards, a moniker reflective both their appearance and the honorific connection to their adoptive father. By the early years of the Common Era, the Langobardi were acknowledged by Roman historians. Velleius Paterculus, a court historian, described them between 9 and 16 AD, portraying Langobardi as a fierce and savage people, even in comparison to other Germanic tribes. Strabo later confirmed their presence near the Elbe River, where he claimed they occupied both banks alongside the Chauci tribe. His observations positioned the Langobardi within the broader grouping of the Suebi, which included multiple tribes extending from the Rhine to the Elbe. In his work Germania, Tacitus provided further insight into the Langobardi. He described them as a tribe distinguished by their small numbers yet marked by their valor. They were largely seen as isolated yet resilient, able to endure the pressures exerted by the powerful tribes surrounding them. Tacitus noted their stance under the rule of Marabot, king of the Marcomanni. When political dynamics shifted due to the rise of Arminius and the tension between him and Marabot, the Langobardi chose to align with Arminius, recognizing him as a liberator symbolizing the fight against external domination. The Langobardi actively engaged in the struggles among their neighbors, with their involvement noted particularly during periods of upheaval within the Cherusci tribe. Their actions helped restore a leader who had been expelled, showcasing the Langobardi's influence and ambitions within the tribal system of the time. Around 47 AD, the Langobardi appeared in strength, asserting their presence when they intervened in internal disputes among other tribes. They were recognized as a power capable of affecting the leadership dynamics among neighboring groups, further solidifying their role in the landscape of Germanic tribes. Reports from the Roman historian Cassius Dio indicate that by 166 the Langobardi, alongside the Alpi, ventured into Pannonia, crossing the Danube. This movement marked their connection to the wider systems of tribal dynamics in the region, even though they faced defeat, leading to their return home. The Langobardi also emerged in the Rhineland during the mid-2nd century. Claudius Ptolemy's geographical accounts placed the Langobardi near the Bructeri and Sugambri, suggesting an expansion of their territory. Simultaneously, the presence of a group referred to as Lacobardi indicates a further spread, possibly reflecting the Langobards' movement and integration into neighboring communities. Archaeological evidence, particularly the burial sites attributed to the Langobardi in the lower Elbe region, showcase their identity as an agricultural society. These burial practices, which include cremation and the placing of personal items within graves, signal cultural customs that were distinct yet interconnected with other Germanic practices. Religiously, the Langobardi's practices evolved over time. Initially, as they settled in their coastal homelands, they worshipped deities associated with fertility and the natural elements. However, with their growing interactions with neighboring tribes and the changing dynamics as they migrated, their religious focus shifted toward the veneration of the Aesir, particularly Odin. This transition reflected their understanding of the evolving landscape and the need to align their cultural practices with their identity as warriors in an increasingly tumultuous environment. The Bructeri were a Germanic tribe that occupied regions of North Rhine-Westphalia, what is now Germany, just outside the borders of the Roman Empire. Initially, they were reported to be located primarily east of the lower Rhine River, with their territory centered around present-day Münster. Their land spanned extensively from both sides of the upper river Ems in the north to both sides of the river Lippe in the south. At the height of their power, the reaches of Bructeri territory extended from the Rhine in the west across the Teutoburg forest and Weser river in the east. In the late 1st century BC and into the 1st AD, the Bructeri faced various pressures that necessitated territorial adjustments. By the end of the 1st century AD, they were compelled to migrate south of the Lippe river, likely as a result of interactions with neighboring groups, absorbing remnants of prior inhabitants such as the Sugambri and Marsi along the way. The Ruhr River now defined their southern limits, creating a boundary between the Bructeri and the Tencteri. By the early 200s, they had settled further south, facing Roman Cologne, which indicates further shifts in their geographic focus. Roman accounts describe the Bructeri as one of the significant Germanic peoples, positioned alongside groups like the Cherusci and Chatti. Their population and military capabilities were considerable compared to many neighboring tribes. Strabo, writing around 20 AD, categorized them into major divisions, distinguishing between the lesser and greater Bructeri. He made note of them being located along the Lippe River, which ran approximately 600 stadia from the Rhine. Ptolemy later referred to the Bructeri in a similar way, maintaining the division into lesser and greater sections based on earlier sources. The first historical reference to the Bructeri appeared during the autumn of 12 BC, when Drusus the Elder engaged in naval confrontations with them on the Ems River. This encounter suggested by then the Bructeri had established settlements along the northern banks of the Ems. Later references to the Bructeri became more pronounced during the aggressive campaigns of the Roman Emperor Augustus, died in 14 AD, aimed at expanding Roman control into the region known as Germania Magna. In 4 AD, Roman historian Velleius Paterculus recorded that Tiberius crossed the Rhine into the lands inhabited by the Bructeri, indicating their significance in Roman military endeavors. By 9 AD, during the significant encounter at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, the Bructeri participated in a coalition against the Roman general Varus, who met a devastating defeat. This event marked a turning point in Roman perceptions of the Bructeri as formidable adversaries. Following this, Tiberius initiated punitive expeditions, likely targeting the southern Bructeri around the Lippe River in 11 AD. The Bructeri remained active participants in military engagements, as evidenced by further actions taken by the Romans in the following years. In 15 AD, Germanicus' campaigns included two significant encounters with the Bructeri, revealing their capacity to muster forces capable of engaging the Romans in direct confrontations. During this time, Aulus Caecina Severus led cohorts into Bructeri territories, leading to a display of resistance met with Roman military success. Noteworthy in one instance was the retrieval of the Eagle standard captured at Teutoburg Forest, highlighting the continuous tension along the Roman borders. Throughout the latter half of the 1st century AD, the Bructeri remained important players in the region's dynamics. In 58 AD, they sought to assist the Angrivarii, who faced displacement caused by the Chauci. However, intense Roman opposition halted their advance, prompting a withdrawal in the face of the growing determinism exhibited by Roman governors. In the years 69 to 70, the Bructeri displayed their martial traits by participating in the Batavian uprising against Roman authority. During this insurrection, a notable figure emerged, Veleda, a prophetess who attained considerable influence and was regarded by some as a divine inspiration for the Germanic tribes. Tacitus chronicled her ascendancy, suggesting that she served as a spiritual leader heralding the triumphs of the Germanic forces against Rome. The Bructeri played critical roles in multiple battles throughout the rebellion. In one notable engagement near Trier, they flanked the Tencteri, demonstrating their strategic deployment. At Castra Vetera, a modern-day Xanten, Bructeri fighters leveraged the terrain, creating marshy conditions that disrupted Roman formations before facing retaliatory pressure. Their combat operations were notable enough that they participated in capturing a Roman flagship on the Rhine, showcasing their capabilities and naval ambition. As the rebellion concluded, the Roman governor Rutilius Gallicus invaded Bructeri lands, capturing Veleda and transporting her to Italy, signaling the Romans' increasing control over the tribe. In about 97 AD, military support was employed to restore a deposed Bructeri king, with Roman authorities leveraging power to maintain influence in the region. Tacitus depicted an alarming decline in Bructeri population after incursions by neighboring tribes such as the Chamavi and Angrivarii around the turn of the century. Reports suggest that significant numbers of Bructeri fell during these skirmishes, leading to profound changes in their territorial claims and political landscape. The Bructeri appeared to have absorbed remnants of the Sugambri Marti, and indicated by diminishing mentions of the latter. By around 100 AD, they appeared alongside their new neighbors, the Tencteri. The Chauci were an ancient Germanic tribe that inhabited a region situated between the river Ems and Elbe, occupying territory on both sides of the Weser River. They extended their living spaces inland to the upper Weser, prompting a mix of coastal and inland lifestyles. Along the coastline, they constructed artificial mounds known as terpen, designed to keep their homes dry during high tides, showcasing their adaptation to the environment. These raised mounds were essential for survival, as the low-lying areas they occupied were prone to flooding. The mounds allowed them to build small settlements which were primarily composed of huts constructed from local materials. The emergence of the Chauci in historical texts remains somewhat obscured by the lack of concrete archaeological evidence. However, in the years leading up to the migration period, they, along with the Frisians, Saxons, and Angles, made up a significant presence along the continental European coast, stretching from the Zuiderzee in the Netherlands down to the southern Jutland in Denmark. Their shared material culture made it difficult to distinguish these groups through artifacts alone, as they employed similar tools, pottery, and housing styles. By around 58 AD, the Chauci were expanding their territory, notably pushing out the Angrivarii, an action that granted them access to the river Ems. This territorial gain established a direct border with the Frisians, thus enhancing their strategic position along the coastline. The Romans differentiated between two groups of the Chauci in their accounts, labeling those who resided between the Weser and Elbe as Greater Chauci, and those between the Ems and Weser as Lesser Chauci. This classification reflects their increasing significance in the broader context of Roman-Germanic interactions. The earliest recorded mention of the Chauci appears around 12 BC, involving their participation in a series of military endeavors against Roman forces under the command of Drusus. The Roman campaigns aimed at exerting control over the Germanic tribes along the lower Rhine, where the Chauci played a role in supporting other Germanic groups. Drusus' efforts to conquer the Chauci met with initial resistance until circumstances forced him to withdraw. Roman historical sources detailed further encounters with the Chauci, particularly during the reign of Augustus. Following the catastrophic defeat suffered by the Romans at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD, where 3 legions were annihilated under the leadership of Arminius, the Chauci maintained a degree of neutrality. While they promised aid to the Romans, they refrained from becoming extensively involved in the subsequent reprisals against other Germanic groups. The encounter furthered their reputation as a supportive and reliable ally when Germanicus pursued campaigns to rectify the losses incurred in this significant battle. Throughout the 1st century AD, the Chauci provided auxiliary forces to the Roman army, which was a common practice among various tribes. Their participation was driven by mutual agreements that allowed them certain privileges while serving under Roman commanders. In accounts of military operations, the Chauci appeared both as mercenaries as part of larger coalitions, either supporting or resisting Roman initiatives. Notably, in 47 AD, the Chauci, alongside their Frisian neighbors, raided the wealthy coastline of Gallia Belgica. This campaign extended into the regions that would eventually become the Roman province of Germania Inferior. The Chauci were led by Gannascus, a leader from the Caninefates group. The Romans, under the command of Corbulo, launched a robust response, integrating maritime operations along with land-based strategies to counter the Germanic incursions. As part of these efforts, the Romans engaged in naval battles, effectively dismantling the Germanic flotilla and reasserting control over the region. Despite these military engagements, the relationship between the Chauci and the Romans experienced fluctuations. For instance, in 69 AD, during the revolt of the Batavi led by Civilis, the Chauci aligned themselves with the insurrection, providing support as tensions escalated against Roman governance. Significant losses were inflicted upon the Romans, including the destruction of a Roman fleet and various military units. The internal dynamics among the Germanic tribes were complex, as the Chauci balanced commitments to their own interests while interacting with the Roman authority. The Chauci were also known for their maritime activities, becoming prominent sea raiders in the early centuries. Their naval prowess was evident through their history of raids along various coastlines, not just limited to their immediate vicinity. Roman accounts suggest that their activities extended to the coasts of Britannia and Gaul, where their sea raiding contributed to regional instability. The Romans experienced several maritime engagements with the Chauci's forces, indicating a persistent threat from the sea. In 41 AD, the Chauci again demonstrated their raiding capabilities along the coasts of Gallia Belgica, signaling their sustained maritime activity. Their naval operations persisted, with sources indicating that such practices were not merely sporadic incidents, but rather indicative of a broader cultural inclination towards seafaring. The combination of their terrestrial and marine strategies showcase an adaptable and formidable society equipped to challenge Roman authority effectively through varied means. The Roman response to the Chauci raids involved continual adjustments in their defense system. By the late 2nd century, fortifications were established in key locations along the coasts to repel further incursions. Archaeological evidence from this period supports notions of destruction attributed to raiders, with communities experiencing fire destruction and loss of property. While the identity of the raiders remains somewhat ambiguous, the Chauci were often implicated in maritime disturbances, compelling the Romans to reinforce their defenses extensively throughout the region. The Usipetes, also known as Usipi, were a Germanic tribe that first came into historical visibility in the mid-1st century BC, specifically during their encounters with Julius Caesar in 55-56 BC. Their name has been interpreted in various ways, traditionally considered of Celtic origin, yet later scholarly interpretations suggested may carry Germanic roots. The name Usipetes comes forth in Caesar's writings, where he chronicles their attempts to escape encroaching threats from the Suebi, who had established military dominance in the regions east of the Rhine. Initially, the Usipetes, in consort with the Tencteri, sought new lands following persistent pressures from the Suebi. The Suebi's territorial expansions prompted these tribes to search for refuge, which ultimately led to the banks of the Rhine River. Their movements positioned them within lands that were occupied by the Menapi, a Belgic tribe. By the winter of 55 BC, having had no success elsewhere, the Usipetes and Tencteri traversed the Rhine, crossing into Menapian territories, while the Menapi temporarily withdrew in response to the perceived threat. The Usipetes and Tencteri strategically feigned retreat to mislead the Menapi, allowing them to return to their domains. This cunning tactic was followed by a sudden assault, through which the Usipetes seized Menapian boats and provisions, leading to a brief period of occupation during the winter months. Their association with cavalry was noted, and they relied on this mobility for both assault and evasion. As tensions escalated, Caesar was compelled to address the presence of the Usipetes and Tencteri. They sought a truce and proposed alliance while boasting of their military capabilities, asserting they were formidable opponents save for the Suebi. However, Caesar viewed their claims skeptically, suspecting they were merely seeking to delay action until reinforcements arrived from their cavalry. The prospects for a peaceful resolution dwindled, and armed engagement became inevitable when the Usipetes disregarded a proposed truce. The ensuing military engagement resulted in a rout for the Usipetes and Tencteri, forcing them into a hasty retreat across the Rhine. Reports suggest that this encounter resulted in high casualties, with estimates indicating tens of thousands of Usipetes lost during their attempt to flee. Ultimately, they found sanctuary among the Sugambri, another Germanic tribe, indicating their tenuous position amid ongoing upheavals. Following the events of 55 BC, the Usipetes continued to navigate the shifting landscape of tribal affiliations. In 16 BC, under the command of Marcus Lollius, they joined forces with the Tencteri and Sugambri in a concerted effort against Roman-held territories in Gaul, resulting in a significant setback for Roman troops. Subsequent records situate the Usipetes between the Rhine and Lippe rivers around 12 to 11 BC, indicating their geographical movements away from the initial territories they occupied post-Caesar. Their relations with other tribes, such as the Tubantes, became evident during this period as they adjusted their borders in response to fluctuating alliances and pressures. In 14 AD, interactions with Roman forces continued, as Usipetes allied with the Bructeri and Tubantes during the campaigns of Germanicus. Tacitus referred to the Usipetes in the context of military proceedings in 58 AD, attributing to them reserved lands on the Roman frontier that had once belonged to their tribe. The records illustrate a trajectory of territorial readjustment as they face ongoing shifts in power dynamics, ultimately edging northward. By around 98, Tacitus again noted their existence, affirming that they had settled between the Chatti and the Rhine, with indications they had migrated from regions they occupied earlier near the Tubantes. Furthermore, the work of Claudius Ptolemy in the 2nd century AD provided a geographic reference that included the Usipoi, who inhabited areas south of the Tencteri and positioned between significant rivers and mountains, suggesting a further relocation of the Usipetes. The Tencteri were an ancient tribe that settled along the lower Rhine in the 1st century BC. They are first noted in historical sources by Julius Caesar and Tacitus. Their ethnic name, which may derive from the term Tencteri or Tencterats, reflects linguistic roots linked to solidity or reliability, possibly suggesting a sense of endurance or sturdiness. Originating from the region around the Weser River, the Tencteri migrated largely due to pressures exerted by the Suebi, a more powerful Germanic tribe. This forced migration compelled both the Tencteri and their neighbors, the Usipetes, to abandon their homelands in search of fertile lands and stability, leading them to the territories of the Menapi, a Belgic tribe residing on both banks of the Rhine. The Tencteri and Usipetes entered the Menapian lands in winter 55 BC. The Menapi, alarmed by the size of the Germanic incursion, initially withdrew. Following this, the Tencteri and Usipetes executed a tactical retreat that allowed them to strike at the Menapi without warning. The Germans seized boats and provender from the Menapi, establishing a brief encampment within their territories during the winter months. Complications arose around the precise location of their attacks. Caesar described events occurring near the confluence of the Rhine and Maas rivers, although archaeological evidence suggested it may have transpired at the junction of the Waal and Maas rivers. As the Romans became aware of the heightened tensions in the region, Caesar focused on countering the perceived threats presented by the Tencteri and Usipetes. Fearing backlash from the Gallic tribes, he convened a meeting among the Gaulish chieftains. The Germans sought to negotiate with Caesar, presenting themselves as military formidable, except against the Suebi. They proposed an alliance, asking for land, but were met with refusal. Caesar's proposal to resettle them among the Ubi, another Germanic tribe seeking Roman favor, was similarly declined by the Tencteri. They requested a truce, which Caesar denied, suspecting it was a ruse to allow their cavalry time to regroup. As tensions escalated, a skirmish ensued, leading to a decisive moment where Caesar's forces engaged the Tencteri and Usipetes. The Germans, despite being ultimately outnumbered, attempted to execute coordinated maneuvers involving cavalry and infantry. However, their efforts faltered under the Roman assault, causing chaos among their ranks and resultant pursuit by Caesar's cavalry. The Tencteri found refuge across the Rhine with the Sugambri. In the aftermath, the brutality of the encounter was stark, with reports indicating significant casualties among the Tencteri as they made desperate attempts to flee. Plutarch records that around 400,000 were reportedly slain, which is surely an exaggeration, still, however, showcasing the catastrophic results of this encounter against the Romans. Subsequent references to the Tencteri illustrate their ongoing existence and movements. In 16 BC, they joined forces with the Usipetes and Sugambri once more, crossing the Rhine to launch a foray into Gaul, ultimately facing defeat at the hands of Roman command under Marcus Lollius, who managed to repel their advances. Tacitus, writing later, described the Tencteri as residing near the Chatti and the Rhine, close to the Ubi, who occupied Cologne. This indicates a transition from their earlier confrontations to more subtle settlements, potentially moving into areas vacated by the Ubi, suggesting a gradual consolidation of their resources and territory. Other historical accounts cite the Tencteri as participating in various military engagements, including confrontations with the Romans under Drusus, who reportedly overcame them in several decisive actions. Through these interactions, the Tencteri established themselves within the broader Germanic milieu while navigating pressures from both internal dynamics and external forces. Descriptions from Claudius Ptolemy's works reference the Tencteri, linked to a broader array of tribes still navigating the shifting landscape of northern Europe. Their mention, alongside tribes like the Bructeri, implies a fluidity within tribal identity, as members may have intermixed or been absorbed into neighboring groups over time. By the late 1st century AD, the Tencteri had taken a position between various Roman settlements and Germanic tribes, with their exact circumstances reflecting a mix of engagement and avoidance of Roman military pursuits. The Peutinger map, a Roman road map from the 4th century, indicates territories across from Cologne that may have included the Bructeri, with the Tencteri likely mingling in these regional dynamics. The Batavi were an ancient Germanic tribe situated in the region of the modern Dutch Rhine Delta, specifically the fertile area that the Romans referred to as Batavia. Their settlement dates back to at least the second half of the 1st century BC, with evidence of continuous habitation in the vicinity stretching back to the 3rd. The etymology of their name may derive from the word Batavio, meaning good island, indicating the rich lands lush with agriculture and suitable for livestock. Geographically, the Batavi inhabited the east bank of the Rhine River, with their territory characterized by a split created by the river between the Waal and the lower Rhine. Historically, they are often associated with the Chatti, another Germanic tribe from whom they reportedly separated due to internal descent. Roman accounts of the tribe emerged prominently through the writings of Julius Caesar and later Tacitus, who acknowledged the Batavi's skill in warfare and their significant role in Roman military operations. The Batavi maintained a network of small villages comprising typically of 6 to 12 houses centered around their agricultural pursuits and cattle raising practices. The landscape provided abundant resources which allowed the Batavi to flourish. Archaeological findings suggest they built wooden houses and crafted tools from stone and metal. The presence of horse skeletons in burial sites indicates a strong connection to horseback riding, an essential aspect of their culture and societal role. By the time of Roman expansion into Germania, the strategic value of the Batavi territory was recognized. The Romans established a military base known as Oppidum Batavorum, so south of the Vaal River, at a site now identified with Nijmegen. This fortified administrative center served both as a guardian of Batavian wealth and a Roman outpost. The Romans appreciated Batavi's martial abilities, integrating them into the Roman military system as an elite unit of cavalry. They provided a significant contribution of soldiers, which led to recognition of their alliance with the Roman state. The Batavi were noted for their remarkable swimming abilities, capable of crossing the tumultuous Rhine River with weapons and armor. This tactical advantage was utilized by Roman commanders on several occasions as they sought to surprise their enemies, employing the skills of Batavian warriors during campaigns in Britannia and Germania. In military service, the Batavi gained a reputation for bravery. They frequently participated in campaigns overseen by figures such as Germanicus, and were involved in the campaigns against the Cherusci, who were led by Arminius. Cariovalda, the first known Batavi commander, led a charge across the Visurgis, the Esa river during these early military endeavors. Tacitus emphasized the Batavians among the bravest tribes and acknowledged their long-standing relationship with Rome, noting that they were not subject to taxes and were employed primarily for military service. The Batavi's military contributions continued beyond local territorial defense. They were involved in various campaigns across the Roman Empire, with evidence of their cohorts stationed as far as Britain, with numerous altars and tombstones belonging to Batavian soldiers were discovered along Hadrian's Wall. Their involvement extended into areas that are now parts of Germany, Hungary, Romania, and Austria. Despite their initial cooperation with the Roman Empire, tensions simmered due to various grievances, particularly related to treatment by Roman officials. One notable figure was Julius Paulus, a high-ranking Batavian who was executed on a false charge of rebellion. Following this incident, another prominent leader, Gaius Julius Civilis, was paraded through Rome in chains, although he was eventually acquitted. Upon returning to his home in the year of significant upheaval in the Roman Empire, 69 AD, Civilis capitalized on the discontent among the Batavi people to lead a revolt against Roman authority. The revolt of the Batavi marked a significant turning point in Batavi's engagement with Rome. Civilis adeptly rallied support, successfully capturing strategic locations, including the important Castra Vetera, which housed 2 Roman legions. This moment escalated the situation into a critical military engagement with the revolt, prompting a response from the Roman army. Various campaigns ensued, and the rebellion spread into northern Gaul and Germania, creating a substantial challenge to Roman governments in the region. As the Romans sought to quell the rebellion, they built a bridge over the Nabalia River to facilitate negotiations, where both parties approached each other to discuss terms. Tacitus chronicled these events in detail, but the record ends abruptly at a crucial moment, leaving the resolution of these tensions somewhat unclear. In the aftermath of the uprising, experiencing significant losses in their military system, the Romans stationed Legio Decima Gemina in fortified bases within Batavi territory to monitor the populace. The Cimbri were an ancient tribal group believed to originate from the Jutland Peninsula situated in present-day Denmark. Various classical authors provided insights into their identities, sometimes categorizing them as Celtic, Germanic, or even associating them with the Cimmerians from ancient lore. The precise linguistic affiliation of the Cimbri remains uncertain, with theories suggesting a potential Germanic or Celtic basis for their language. The etymology of their name has been linked to roots meaning inhabitant or people of the coast, indicating a connection to their geographical surroundings. Around the late 2nd century BC, the Cimbri embarked on a significant movement southward, joining forces with other tribes like the Teutones and Ambrones. This coalition began a series of engagements that led to the Cimbrian War, challenging the Roman Republic. The initial phase of their incursions saw the Cimbri clash with various Gallic tribes and Roman allies, notably the Taurisci, in territories such as Noricum. In this context, the Cimbri displayed effective military organization and tactics. The Romans first encountered the Cimbri when they invaded Noricum. Initially, the Roman consul Cneius Papirius Carbo was sent to defend the Taurisci. However, after their clash, the Cimbri successfully routed the Romans at the Battle of Noreia, where adverse conditions played a role in preventing a complete Roman disaster. Following this victory, the Cimbri pushed further into southern regions, making their way toward the territories claimed by Rome. In 109 BC, the Cimbri turned their attention to Gaul, where they engaged in a relentless campaign against Roman forces and local tribes. In one notable encounter in 109 BC, the Cimbri defeated a Roman army under Consul Marcus Junius Silanus in southern Gaul. In 107 BC, they achieved another victory at the Battle of Burdigala, modern Bordeaux, wherein the Roman commander Gaius Cassius Longinus met his end. By 105 BC, the Cimbri focused directly on the Roman Republic, moving towards the Rhone River in preparation for a larger-scale engagement. Their approach was marked by a lack of coordination within the Roman ranks, particularly between the proconsul Quintus Servilius Caepio and the consul Cneius Mallius Maximus, leading to a catastrophic outcome at the Battle of Arausia. Reports of this battle detail the staggering loss of life for the Romans, within estimates reaching as high as 80,000 fatalities, all attributed to effective tactics and overwhelming numbers of the Cimbri. In 104-3 BC, rather than proceeding directly toward Rome, the Cimbri made a foray into the Iberian Peninsula, where they sought new spoils and resources. Their plundering, however, was met with resistance, leading to a defeat against a coalition of Celtiberian tribes, forcing them to retreat back into Gaul to regroup with their allies, the Teutones and Ambrones. Ultimately, in 102 BC, the Cimbri attempted to re-enter Italy, navigating through the Alpine passes. They aimed to traverse northern Italy rapidly, faced with the Roman forces that had since regrouped and were better prepared under Gaius Marius. Notable battles ensued, with Marius defeating the Teutones and Ambrones at Aquae Sextiae, strengthening Roman resolve. The Cimbri, having moved southward through favorable terrain, were eventually engaged at the Battle of Vercellae in 101 BC. The outcome of this battle was disastrous for the Cimbri. Many of their leaders perished or were captured, including Boiorix and Lugius. It is reported that the women of the Cimbri chose to end their lives alongside their children rather than face captivity, illustrating the cultural values of honor and freedom among the Cimbri people. Cultural practices among the Cimbri included a system where warrior values and familial ties were paramount. The Cimbri were often accompanied by women and priestesses who played a crucial role in their rituals and societal functions. Strabo described the priestesses as seers who dressed in white, leading sacrificial ceremonies that involved prisoners of war. Reports suggest that they practiced divination through blood rituals, examining entrails to forecast future events. Archaeological evidence, such as the famed Gundestrup cauldron, suggests that the Cimbri engaged in ritualistic practices that might have included offerings, indicating a belief system that centered around divination and propitiation to deities or natural forces. The cauldron, adorned with intricate carvings, reflects a melding of artistic styles, implying interactions with or influence from neighboring cultures. The language of the Cimbri remains a point of contention amongst scholars. Ancient Authors sometimes labeled them as Germani, while others grouped them with Celtic tribes. The nomenclature of their leaders contains elements suggestive of Celtic linguistic roots. Names like Boiorix, Gaisorix, and Lugius exemplify this ambiguity and raise questions about the extent of cultural exchanges the Cimbri navigated the territories of Gauls and Romans. Despite their warrior existence, the Cimbri maintained familial bonds, and evidence points to communal living arrangements for their families during military campaigns. The Cimbri were known to travel with carts laden with belongings, including the possessions of women and children, implying the integration of familial ties into their martial identity. Historical records also suggest that remnants of the Cimbri population persisted in their homeland after their defeat. Authors from later periods made references to a Cimbrian presence in Jutland, indicating a continuity of identity that endured despite the devastation met by the tribe in Italy. The Frisii inhabited a low-lying region located between the Rhine-Meuse-Scheldt delta and the river Ems, an area characterized by marshlands that were largely uninhabited until around the 6th or 5th centuries BC. As sea levels rose, these marshlands became increasingly difficult to inhabit due to flooding, prompting early settlers to construct their homes on elevated village mounds known as terps. This adaptation to the environment reflected their agricultural lifestyle, which focused on farming and cattle raising. Linguistically and culturally, the Frisii shared similarities with the neighboring Celtic tribes. Their customs and material culture bore close resemblance to those of the Chaucian tribes to the east, a group classified within the broader Germanic tribal confederation. The integration of these cultural elements shaped the identity of the Frisii, contributing to their distinct local practices while situating them within the wider context of Germanic society. As Roman influence expanded in the 1st century BC, they took control of the Rhine delta. Despite this, the Frisii, specifically those situated to the north of the Rhine, maintained a level of independence. Their geographical position allowed them to interact extensively with Roman traders and military personnel. Mercenary bands from the Frisii and Chauci enlisted in the Roman army, further integrating them into the Roman world while also asserting their own identity in ways that were sometimes at odds with Roman interests. Roman accounts from this period, such as those by Pliny the Elder and Tacitus, provide insights into the Frisii's way of life. Pliny described their lands as being forested, filled with tall trees that extended to the edges of the lakes. Tacitus noted that the Frisii, along with other Germanic tribes, operated within a system of limited kingship, where leaders were elected and wielded power that was more influential than authoritative. This reflects a decentralized political system wherein the Frisii likely lived in scattered settlements rather than under a strong, centralized authority. The earliest mention of the Frisii in the context of Roman military activities comes from the campaign led by Drusus in 12 BC against the Rhine Germans and Chauci. The Frisii were not directly targeted in this military excursion. Instead, Drusus passed through their territory en route to engage with the Chauci, effectively winning them over and imposing a level of suzerainty. Although they did not face direct military conquest, Roman governance imposed certain demands, including taxation. Following Drusus' campaign, the taxes imposed on the Frisii began to increase. A Roman governor raised tax requirements significantly, resulting in the destruction of their livestock and appropriation of their lands. In response to this exploitation, by 28 AD, the Frisii revolted against the Roman taxation system. They executed Roman soldiers who were collecting taxes and besieged the governor, forcing him to seek refuge in a nearby fort. The Roman propraetor, Lucius Apronius, attempted to relieve the siege but suffered a great defeat at the Battle of Baduenna Wood. This event elevated the status of the Frisii among neighboring tribes, as they successfully thwarted Roman authority without severe retribution from the Romans. Despite this victory, the Frisii shifted from an aligned position to one of discontent with Roman rule. In AD 47, the Frisii, alongside the Caninefates and Chauci, instigated raiding operations along the coast of Gallia Belgica under the leadership of a figure named Gannascos. The Roman commander Corbulo countered these incursions, effectively re-establishing Roman dominance and resettling the Frisii under Roman oversight, where they were subjected to a redefined system of governance, including Roman-style senatorial authority. In 54 AD, the Frisii occupied an inhabited land that had come under Roman control, settling into their newly claimed homes, sowing seeds, and plowing fields. When the Romans attempted to displace them, inviting two Frisii kings to Rome to discuss their presence on the land, the Frisii refused to abandon their new settlements. The Romans responded militarily, leading to deadly coercion against the Frisii, culminating in violence against those who resisted the Roman military's orders. The most substantial account of the Frisii's involvement in larger military movements against Rome is documented during the revolt of the Batavi in 69 AD. The uprising, initially led by the Batavi, attracted other tribes, including the Frisii. Under the leadership of Civilis from the Batavi, the coalition of Germanic tribes experienced early successes against Roman forces, capturing and defeating Roman military camps. However, the tides of the uprising turned, and after enduring substantial military losses, the Romans managed to reassert their control over the region. Throughout this tumultuous period, the Frisii maintained a dual role, at times providing auxiliary forces for the Romans, while also participating in actions against them. The Chamavi were a Germanic people who inhabited the region just north of the Roman boundary along the Rhine River delta. This area corresponds to parts of modern-day Netherlands, particularly in the Gelderland province, and potentially extending into what is now Germany. The name Chamavi may be preserved in the name of the area known as Amaland, lying between the rivers Issel and Ems near the modern city of Deventer. Linguistically, the etymology of the Chamavi name is uncertain, but is generally believed to derive from a Germanic language. Three main hypotheses concerning its origin suggest that it could stem from a verb meaning to press or hinder, which might imply a connotation of being immobile or powerless. Another proposal connects it to the Old English word for an enclosed piece of land, suggesting that the Chamavi dwelled in such areas. A third possibility ties it to terms for shirt, possibly indicating a reference to garments worn for war. The first historical mentions of the Chamavi appear in sources that date back to the early Roman Empire. One possible reference comes from Velleius Paterculus, who in a surviving text describes Tiberius' actions around 4 AD. The narrative reports that Tiberius crossed the Rhine, suggesting an encounter with, quote, "Camvi faciat tuari Bructeri." Some scholars argue that this might pertain to the Chamavi instead of the Canenefates, indicating a presence near the Rhine river during this time. By the time of Tacitus, in around 58, the Chamavi were acknowledged in the context of other Germanic tribes. Tacitus notes that the Angrivarii displaced from their territories near the Ems sought permission from Roman authorities to settle in a specified buffer zone along the northern bank of the Rhine. The land they desired was identified as being previously associated with the Chamavi as well as the Tubantes and Usipi. This passage suggests that Chamavi territory once extended to the Rhine, providing evidence of their geographical position and interactions with neighboring groups. In Tacitus' work Germania, written around 100 AD, he mentions that the Chamavi and Angrivarii had shifted southward into areas formerly occupied by the Bructeri, their neighbors. This relocation could signify alterations in their territorial claims and demographic patterns over the years. At this time, the Bructeri were described as all but eliminated by an alliance of surrounding groups, indicating a significant shift in the balance of power in the region. Tacitus goes on to describe the geographical layout of the area surrounding the Chamavi. He records that to the northeast lived the Dulgubini and Casuari, while to the northwest lay the Frisians. Further south, the Tencteri and Usipi inhabited lands between the Rhine and the Chatti, framing the Chamavi among a network of various tribes, each with distinctive territories and systems. Ptolemy's writings in the 2nd century also reference the Chamavi, although his texts are sometimes difficult to interpret, blending various sources. He refers to a group called the Chamavi, and places them to the south of the Chauci, who occupied coastal areas between the Ems and Deza rivers. Moreover, Ptolemy describes another mention of the Chamavi as the Chamavoi, positioning them with the Cherusci near the Elbe. These contrasting locations in Ptolemy's accounts indicate a level of mobility amongst tribes and possible reconfigurations in settlement patterns. The Chamavi are specifically noted for their relationships with neighboring tribes such as the Tubantes and Usipi. They seemed to have held a prominent position in the network of Germanic groups surrounding the Rhine, a crucial area for both trade and military movements. The Angrivarii were a Germanic tribe situated in northwest Germany near the middle of the Weser River. They emerged prominently in historical records during the early Roman Empire. The mention of their name can be found in the writings of Roman authors such as Tacitus and Ptolemy. The etymology of their name, Angrivarii, suggests a geographic origin believed to mean men of Engern, linking them to the region characterized by meadows. In the time of Tacitus, around the turn of the Common Era, the Angrivarii were located east of the Weser, neighbored by the Chamavi to the west and the powerful Cherusci to the east. They were part of a wider Germanic alliance, notably with Arminius, who gained prominence after leading the coalition that decisively defeated Roman legions at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. This battle marked a pivotal moment in the Romans' expansion into Germanic territories and set the stage for ongoing interactions between the Angrivarii and the Roman Empire. After the defeat of the Romans, the Angrivarii capitalized on the weakened status of the Bructeri, a neighboring tribe that had been expelled and largely destroyed during the upheaval that followed the battle. Under the shifting alliances of the early 1st century, the Angrivarii, along with the Chamavi, took over the lands formerly belonging to the Bructeri, further consolidating their position in the region. During the military campaigns led by Germanicus Caesar in the years following the Teutoburg Forest disaster, the Angrivarii played a significant role. These campaigns aimed to reassert Roman control over the provinces, with Germanicus seeking to pacify the tribes of the region. The Angrivarii initially showed signs of loyalty to the Roman cause. They engaged in tactical maneuvers against the Cherusci and other tribes aligned with Arminius. However, this allegiance was complicated by the shifting loyalties characteristic of the time. The Angrivarii experienced internal tensions leading to a defection during renewed military actions by Arminius. The revolt proved short-lived. A Roman cavalry assault effectively turned the tide against them. Despite the setback, they quickly found themselves resuming a position of alliance with the Cherusci against the Romans. In a notable encounter at a strategically important embankment, they set an ambush that was ultimately preempted by the Romans, who were informed of the impending maneuver. The Romans dislodged the Angrivarii, routing their forces. Following their defeat, the Angrivarii once again faced Roman forces under Germanicus. In this instance, they capitulated unconditionally, seeking mercy from the general. Germanicus granted clemency, recognizing the role of the Angrivarii in assisting the Romans in recovering scattered ships and soldiers after a storm in the North Sea. The relationship solidified as the Angrivarii, having shifted to a position of subordination, began to serve the Romans in various capacities. Tacitus highlights the Angrivarii along with other tribes such as the Cherusci and the Chatti in his accounts of Germanicus' triumph in 17 AD. Their subsequent collaboration with Rome emphasized their relevance in regional dynamics, aiding in soldiering and local governance. The geographical region inhabited by the Angrivarii, which was later associated with the name Engern, consisted of a landscape of meadows and forests. This terrain significantly influenced their way of life, with agricultural practices likely integral to their community. Archaeological remains in these areas, although limited in direct evidence for the Angrivarii themselves, suggest that Germanic tribes exhibited a variety of settlement patterns, often dispersing within the fertile plains and wooded areas around the Weser. By the 2nd century, Ptolemy's writings continued to recognize the Angrivarii, placing them east of the Weser and south of the greater Chauci warburg coastal settlements. His descriptions reveal a broader Germanic systems of tribes where alliances fluctuated, resulting in shifting boundaries and territorial claims. The Sugambri, also referred to as Sugambri in ancient writings, were a notable Germanic tribe inhabiting the region between the Rhine, Lippe, and Wupper rivers. in present-day Germany near the border with the Netherlands. The earliest recorded mention of the Sugambri dates to 55 BC, when they were discussed in detail by Julius Caesar in his Commentari de Bello Gallico. Caesar indicated that they occupied the eastern bank of the Rhine, extending northward from the territory of the Ubi and reaching towards the nearby settlement areas of the Menapi. The Sugambri inhabited a territory characterized by a mix of dense forests, open agricultural land, and waterways. They existed within a cultural and linguistic contact zone that saw influences from both Germanic and Celtic traditions. Many names of Sugambrian leaders bore Celtic endings such as Rix, indicating interactions or potential shared cultural elements with neighboring Gallic tribes. Their material culture was a variant of the Latin one, which represented a phase of Celtic influence in the region. The lack of clarity regarding their linguistic ties, whether they spoke a Germanic or Celtic language, has intrigued scholars, as their setting facilitated interactions with both linguistic groups. During the Gallic Wars, the Sugambri emerged as participants in broader regional dynamics. When tribes such as the Tencteri and Usipetes crossed the Rhine into Eburones territory, they faced Roman forces under Caesar, who noted their strategic involvement when the Sugambri refused to surrender the fleeing cavalry. This encounter demonstrated their unwillingness to submit to Roman authority. To assert dominance, Caesar constructed a bridge across the Rhine and invaded Sugambri territory, though they avoided direct combat, retreating into less accessible areas. The Romans destroyed their villages and resources, forcing the tribe to adapt. In 53 BC, following the defeat of the Eburones, Caesar received support from approximately 2,000 Sugambrian horsemen who crossed the Rhine to raid Roman-occupied territory, successfully launching an attack on a Roman garrison at Adua Tuca. Their surprise offensive emphasized their martial prowess and resourcefulness, allowing them to withdraw with significant plunder. The fluctuation of power dynamics between the Roman Empire and the Sugambri continued into the late 1st century BC and early 1st century AD. Under Emperor Augustus, significant campaign efforts targeted the Sugambri. In 16 BC, the leader Melo organized a combined force with the Tencteri and Usipetes, achieving an initial victory over a Roman detachment led by Marcus Lollius. This engagement marked a pivotal moment as it challenged Roman authority in the region and prompted immediate Roman responses to reassert control. The Roman military campaigns intensified between 12 BC and 8 BC, particularly under the leadership of Nero Claudius Drusus. Drusus carried out a series of operations that devastated Sugambrian lands, which had become increasingly fragmented due to their ongoing engagements with other tribes, such as the Chatti. The Romans established a fortified presence at Oberaden as part of their efforts to secure the territory. By 9 BC, the Sugambri allied with the Cherusci and Suebi, launching an organized resistance against Roman forces but ultimately suffering defeat. Following this loss, a section of the Sugambri were compelled to relocate west of the Rhine, where they became integrated into the Roman system. Tiberius, Augustus' successor, adopted a different strategy, employing diplomatic means to isolate Sugambrian leadership and develop relations with more cooperating Germanic tribes. An estimated 40,000 individuals may have been relocated to areas in proximity to Xanten, reflecting changes in the demographic landscape of the region. Formalized arrangements allowed for the settlement of Sugambrian elites within Roman territories under strict military oversight. In 9 AD, Deudorix, a Sugambrian leader, allied with the Germanic rebellion led by Arminius, ultimately contributing to the defeat of Roman legions commanded by Publius Quinctilius Varus. This joint effort showcased both the resilience of the Sugambri and their role in larger regional dynamics. Following this, they appeared in historical records as examples of tribes impacted by Roman expansion and military actions. Around 20 AD, Strabo provided his observations on the Sugambri, reiterating their location along the Rhine, adjacent to the Menapi. His writings indicated that some Sugambri had migrated west while others still retained their presence in the more sparsely populated eastern region, suggesting a gradual adaptation to the changing landscape of Germanic tribes under Roman influence. Strabo noted that they remained one of the most recognized Germanic tribes, their identity interwoven with the broader narrative of the region. Despite earlier dislocations and demographic changes, the Sugambri persisted in cultural memory even as an independent entity faded by the end of the 1st century BC. Their legacy, however, lived on in various auxiliary units and literary references where they were often depicted as quintessential warriors resistant to the spread of Roman culture. Inscriptions attributed to the Sugambri surfaced occasionally from 76 to 157 AD, primarily in contexts linked to military activities along the Danube, indicating that while they may have been dispersed, their presence still influenced military operations within the empire. Poets of the Augustan era referenced the Sugambri, perpetuating a vivid portrayal of their storied past and martial reputation. These cultural references underscored their enduring legacy, ensuring that the Sugambri remained a noted entity within the Roman narrative of Germanic peoples. The Angles emerged as a notable group of Germanic tribes inhabiting the Angeln Peninsula, situated on the coast of the Baltic Sea in what is now Schleswig-Holstein, Germany. Their name, recorded in the work of Tacitus around 98 AD as Angli, is believed to derive from the region itself. Two main theories exist regarding the etymology of their name. One suggests a connection to a Germanic root meaning narrow, possibly referring to the Schlei estuary's characteristics. The other implies a link to the shape of the peninsula, which resembles a hook, indicative of their potential fishing activities. Tacitus describes the Angles as one of the more remote tribes among the Suebic groups, lacking the notoriety of other tribes such as the Semnones and Langobardi, who were situated near the significant rivers of the Elbe and Rhine. The geographical placement of the Angles places them in a less accessible area defined by natural barriers like rivers and dense woodlands that offered protection from potential incursions. Tacitus observes that these tribes lived behind fortifications created by their surroundings, hence remaining largely unknown to the Romans, who perceived the terrain as inhospitable and enigmatic. In addition to their geographical remoteness, Tacitus notes that the Angles worshipped Nertus, referred to as Mother Earth, whose sanctuary was said to be found on an island surrounded by water. This worship reflects a relationship with the land and nature, emphasizing their cultural practices and the significance they placed on femininity in the divine. The cult of Nertus is often considered precursor to later cultural expressions in Scandinavia, as similar worship practices are documented in pre-Christian Scandinavian religion. Ptolemy's geography, written around the mid-2nd century AD, offers another perspective on the Angles, although his account introduces some confusion. The text mentions the Sueboi Angeiloi, located between the northern Rhine and central Elbe, which contradicts Tacitus' observations about the coastal presence of the Angles. This discrepancy gives rise to various interpretations regarding their original home. Some scholars suggest that Ptolemy's account may have mislocated the tribes, or that the Angles inhabited multiple regions, potentially interacting with other coastal peoples. The ambiguity in their location underscores the notion that the Angles may have existed at the confluence of various tribal systems. Later interpretations propose that the Angles were part of a broader network within the Suebic population. Their interactions with neighboring tribes such as the Reudigni, Aviones, Varini, Eudoses, Suarines, and Teutones form a complex web of relationships that highlight the dynamics of tribal identification and alliance in the region. The mention of the Eudoses is significant as they are often linked to the Utes, suggesting a shared cultural heritage and possibly intermingling among these groups. The Angles also seem to have similarities with other Germanic cultures, as evidenced by the archaeological finds in their territories. Artifacts Burial customs and settlement patterns indicate a societal system that involved familial ties, trade connections, and ritual practices. Settlements likely consisted of farming areas and fishing hubs, emphasizing subsistence strategies that revolved around the abundant resources provided by the Baltic environment. Following Tacitus' observations, the descriptions of the Angles suggest a well-defined tribal organization with leadership likely stemming from familiar or heroic lineages. The Gesta Danorum recounts legendary figures Dan and Angul, who are depicted as leaders chosen by their people for their bravery. Such narratives reinforce the importance of valor and kingship within Anglo society. This foundation indicates a strategy of governance reliant on personal loyalty and communal support rather than centralized authority. Cultural practices of the Angles may also involve rituals associated with seasonal cycles, agricultural production, and maritime activities. These practices would have fostered a sense of community among the tribes, emphasizing shared identities and values rooted in their environment and natural surroundings. The religious aspects of their lives appear to be integrated into their daily existence, with communal ceremonies held at significant sites, including watery locations that were sacred to their traditions. The Angles' geographic isolation contributed to their cultural development, allowing them to maintain distinct practices that diverge from neighboring tribes. Their interactions with the Romans, primarily through trade or occasional expeditions, would have introduced new elements into their society, influencing everything from material culture to broader economic practices. The Varini, also known as Varini, were an early Germanic tribe mentioned in classical texts, particularly those of Pliny the Elder and Tacitus. Their name is believed to derive from roots meaning defenders or living by the river, suggesting a connection to water sources in their habitat. The earliest known reference to the Varini appears in Pliny's Natural History, written around 77 AD, where he grouped them among 5 significant Germanic races alongside the Burgundians, Carini, Gutones, and others. This categorization places the Varini firmly within the broader spectrum of Germanic identity. Tacitus provided a more detailed account of the Varini in his work Germania, composed around 98 AD. He listed them among the Suebian peoples, indicating their geographical location was east and possibly north of the Semnones and Langobardi, who inhabited the areas along the river Elbe. Tacitus highlighted that these tribes were characterized by their close association with rivers and forests, suggesting a lifestyle intertwined with the natural environment. The Varini held a prominent religious belief system centered on the worship of a goddess referred to as Ertha, or Mother Earth. Tacitus described their sacred rituals, which took place in a consecrated grove located on a remote island in the sea. The central element of these rites was a chariot covered by a garment which was only permitted to be touched by a single priest. This figure had the honor of perceiving the presence of the goddess and accompanying her as she was drawn by cows during ceremonial processions. These events were times of great festivity, punctuated by joy and communal celebration. Life in the tribe posed during these ceremonies, as all weapons were secured, emphasizing a collective embrace of tranquility and reverence during the goddess's visit. The Varini's geographical context can be traced through the accounts of Ptolemy, who in the 2nd century mentioned the tribe as Viruni, placing them in proximity to the Elbe River. This position illustrates their potential interactions with neighboring groups and other tribal dynamics of the time. Schutta's analysis of Ptolemy's writings suggests that the Viruni may have resided near the Teutones and the Varini, creating a complex landscape of tribes to the west and east. The area described by these ancient texts encompasses regions that would later become significant in Germanic history. The Varini likely inhabited territory that corresponds to modern northern Germany, possibly in or around Mecklenburg. This region was characterized by dense forests and numerous rivers conducive to a lifestyle predominantly based on both hunting and gathering, as well as small-scale agriculture. The Varini were a part of a broader cultural and ethnic formation within the Germanic tribes. Their religious practices, community organization, and relationships with surrounding tribes reflect a distinct identity that was likely influenced by the natural resources and the landscape of their environment. The significance placed on the sacred rituals indicates a worldview in which the natural and spiritual realms were interconnected. Interactions with neighboring tribes, such as the Saxons to the north and the Semnones to the south, would have shaped their existence, although these dynamics remain somewhat obscure in the ancient texts. The existence of shared beliefs and systems among tribes in the region points towards a complex web of relationships defined more by cultural affinities than explicit interaction noted in historical accounts. Tacitus articulated the importance of ritual and belief among the Varini, stating that during their sacred festivals they did not engage in any battles or bear arms. This practice underscores a cultural emphasis on peace during specific times of religious significance. The acts of securing weapons and embracing a collective tranquility served to strengthen communal bonds during these pivotal moments. The Teutones, an ancient northern European tribe, are primarily documented through Roman sources. They first gained prominence in the historical record during the late 2nd century BC through their involvement in the Cimbrian War, joining forces with the Cimbri and several other groups against the Roman Republic. Their military campaigns were marked by initial success, particularly with victories at Noreia and Arausia, which showcased their capability as a formidable military power. These engagements attracted Roman attention and highlighted the threat posed by northern tribes. Julius Caesar later provided a characterization of the Teutones, comparing them to the Germanic peoples of his time. His accounts suggest that they were located in regions east of the Rhine River, although he and other classical writers often failed to draw clear distinctions between tribes identified as Celtic and those categorized as Germanic. This lack of differentiation reflects the broader Roman perspective on northern tribes, which typically regarded them as a collective group. The language of the Teutones remains uncertain. They are commonly classified as a Germanic tribe, yet the inscriptions and names found in Roman texts often suggest Celtic influences. The name Teutones may derive from a Proto-Indo-European term indicating a group of tribes, and its formation is similar to the names of other tribes across European cultures. Some historians have postulated a Celtic origin due to the nature of their names, alongside associations like the Cimbri, whose names also bear Celtic characteristics. Plutarch noted that the Teutones, along with the Cimbri, had traversed extensive lands and had limited interaction with other peoples, making their exact origins a matter of conjecture. Various theories emerged, suggesting they could be linked to the Germanic tribes existing near the Northern Ocean, or possibly represented a mixed lineage of Scythians and Celts. This ambiguity has fueled discussions regarding their geographic and cultural roots. Geographically, accounts from ancient travelers like Pytheas describe the Teutones inhabiting regions where amber was washed ashore. They established trade networks capitalizing on this resource and were associated with neighboring Germanic groups such as the Guiones. Pomponius Mela provided further insight by referencing a large island called Codanovia within a bay known as Codanus, indicating the Teutones may have settled in areas that later corresponded to what is now known as Scandinavia or the southern Baltic coast. The Cimbrian War became a defining moment for the Teutones. After initial successes against Roman forces, the combined armies divided their strength, leading to separate confrontations. In 102 BC, Gaius Marius led Roman forces against the Teutones at the Battle of Aquae Sextiae, where they achieved a significant victory. The aftermath of this battle was particularly harrowing. The king of the Teutones, Teutobod, was captured, and the fate of the Teutonic women became a poignant part of the narrative. Facing the prospect of being taken as concubines or slaves, the women chose to take their own lives, a tragic account that would resonate through Roman literature, encapsulating their fierce resolve and dignity. The account of the Teutones did not fade after their military encounters. Roman historians continued to mention them, referencing their location and categorization. Strabo, for example, classified the Teutones within the context of Germanic tribes, while Pliny further linked them with the Ingaivones, a group of tribes related to the Cimbri and the Chauci. The Quadi were a Germanic people who rose to prominence around 20 AD, primarily inhabiting a kingdom centered in the region of present-day western Slovakia near the Morava River. Their territory later expanded into parts of Hungary, positioning them in a strategically favorable area north of the Roman frontier along the Danube River. The Quadi were one of four closely related Suebian kingdoms that established themselves after a period of major Roman military campaigns. The other kingdoms were the Hermunduri, Naristi, and the Marcomanni, the latter being their powerful western neighbors. Initially, the Quadi likely settled along the Moravia River, an area previously occupied by the Celtic Boii and the Dacians. Over time, as the Celtic population declined or migrated, the Quadi expanded further into the region, which had been partly vacated. This movement was significant as it allowed the Quadi to increase their influence and control over a broad area. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Quadi may have first moved into Moravia around the same time as the Marcomanni settled in the adjacent Bohemia region. They were culturally connected to the Elbe, Germani, and shared similarities with other nearby Germanic tribes. The material culture of the Quadi was distinct, influenced by both older Celtic and newer Germanic traditions, leading to a unique cultural identity. Strabo, the Hellenic geographer, is one of the earliest writers to mention the Quadi around 23 AD. His descriptions include references to the Hercynian forest and the groups related to the Suebian tribes in the region. Although some details in Strabo's account are considered questionable, it nonetheless establishes an early geographical context for understanding the Quadi's place among their neighbors. Tacitus, later in the 1st century, provides clearer insight into the Quadi's internal systems of governance. He records that the ruling class consisted of kings of their own nation, with mentions of leaders such as Teutones. His accounts highlight that the Quadi had maintained a level of autonomy, governing themselves while occasionally yielding to Roman influence. Communities and tribes bordering the Quadi included the Osi and Cotini, who were distinct in language and function, working in iron mines and paying tribute to the Quadi. In the years following 9 BC, when the Marcomanni were defeated and subsequently established in Bohemia, the Quadi began to flourish in their territory. The interrelations among the Quadi, Marcomanni, and other Suebian tribes reveal a network of alliances and influence that shaped their collective interactions with Rome. As Roman influence began to extend into their territories, the Quadi initially adopted a cautious approach, avoiding confrontations while focusing on consolidating their power. The Quadi experienced notable leadership changes throughout the 1st century AD, notably under King Vannius. Vannius ruled during a time that saw increasing interactions with Rome. His kingdom emerged when the Romans attempted to create a buffer state around the Danube region. Vannius became quite wealthy and influential, ruling over a mixed population of erstwhile Marcomanni exiles and other tribes. His regime eventually faced challenges from the Hermunduri, leading to his deposition around 50-51 AD. During Vannius' reign, Quadi leaders engaged in both military and diplomatic relations with the Romans, balancing their identity as a Germanic people with the pressures exerted by their powerful neighbor. The Quadi's military contributions became significant, as evidenced by their participation alongside Roman forces in battles like the Second Battle of Bedriacum in 69 AD. Such engagements exemplify the duality in their position. They aligned with Rome in certain contexts, while managing their internal dynamics and external threats. The Quadi maintained their system of governance with varying degrees of autonomy, leading to a respected status among neighboring tribes. Striking a balance between alliance and resistance, their leadership managed to negotiate favorable terms with Rome. However, ongoing pressures from distant and aggressive tribes often created instability in the region. This adversarial environment led to a revaluation of their alliances and systems of governance in the context of shifting international landscapes. As the 2nd century began, the Quadi were drawn into a series of extended military engagements that would define their interactions with Rome. During the rule of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the Quadi participated in the Marcomannic Wars, a period marked by significant challenges and transformative shifts in power dynamics. The pressures exerted by invading forces compelled groups such as the Quadi to engage actively in military actions against Rome, leading to several attempts to negotiate peace and maintain sovereignty. In the latter part of the century, the Quadi's position became more defined through their interactions with both Rome and internal stakeholders. After a series of military campaigns against the Romans, including attempts to invade Italian territories, the leadership faced increased scrutiny from Roman authorities. By 179 AD, there was a notable presence of Roman military personnel stationed in Quadi territories, indicating a shift towards a more established Roman influence in their governance. Amid these changes, the Quadi provided essential resources, including horses and cattle, as contributions during Roman military expeditions. They navigated the complexity of their alliances and relationships with various tribes while consistently reasserting their identity. Despite instances of internal rebellion and changing leadership, the Quadi adapted to the pressures around them, contributing to the intricate dance of power along the Danube border during this formative period of their history.